Hello and welcome to season 4, episode 15 of Duelist Community. I am very much appreciating this conversation and my ability to take part in it as often as I do. Said it before, but feel a little bit fucking spoiled, not gonna lie, for being able to dig into it as often as I can with so many people being involved in it and getting it and being weary of certain pitfalls along the way and almost informing each other through being open about what they're experiencing. And so we're deepening into it at such an accelerated rate that it really gets me excited. But it's not to say that I don't recognize how cool it is to be able to kind of stumble into being able to have the conversation so easily. So I appreciate you for having it with me.
And I'm honestly just trying to listen, just trying to listen to whatever it is that I'm listening to. Because at one point in my life, I didn't recognize how consistent the messages were that were around me. Like, relax. I talked about that a bit today in our Patreon group, how the simple concept of relax was said so often to me in times of crisis. And I never appreciated it until finally I saw the power in relaxation. And now relax means something totally different to me. It's so much bigger than the concept ever was. And yet I still use that concept to point at the reality of what that is. And so at this point in my life, what I keep hearing in our groups, in our discussions, on our Discord, and otherwise, just in my life day to day, is the message of timing. I keep hearing this over and over again. Wow, that is crazy timing. Wow, I was just thinking about that. Wow, I just managed to drop into this group exactly when I needed to think about this. And oh my God, I was just going through this the other day. It's so obviously consistent that I can't help but wonder, is that what I'm telling myself now? Watch the timing, get out of the way, stop trying to make it go faster, stop trying to push things beyond where they're supposed to be. Because why am I doing that if not for my own reasons? And what reasons can that be if not for some fear that things may not work otherwise? And so the timing I'm falling into is my own. I'm just starting to recognize that. And I just want to say how grateful I am for everybody who I've been talking to and communicating with, whether you realize it or not, for communicating this incredible insight that I'm just starting to grasp. I appreciate the fact that I can share that with you, even here in this episode. And I'm looking forward to this conversation because I think some of it is going to be regarding timing. But by that, I mean more specifically how we develop. We were talking about this a bit this morning on Dualistic Unity Raw. That would be the episode from March 13th for anybody who's wondering. In terms of our changing mentality, like as a child, we look up to adults, we have a concept of what an adult is, and then we go through this process of recognizing that our concept of adulthood isn't actually the reality of adulthood. And as soon as we get past that concept, we realize that we are in fact adults, because the entire process of us working through that concept is the process of maturity, is the process of recognizing the reality behind the shiny finish. And so today I wanted to talk a little bit about emotions in that process of development, in going from one perception of ourself developmentally to a new perception of ourself developmentally, and specifically not just going through a perception of ourself developmentally from, say, being a child to an adult, but from a human to the universe.
All right. I'm excited for this because this is something I actually brought up on that Raw episode that Ray referenced was the balance between being reality, recognizing that you're reality, seeing it very clearly, which means that everyone you interact with is you, and knowing wholeheartedly that you're interacting with yourself versus getting caught up in that perception of division and kind of balancing that. And so I'm I guess kind of curious with your perspective on emotions between the two, because for me, just like my initial thought is there's a shift in your perspective of emotions as you go in and out of that. It's not that the emotion is happening to you or you're experiencing the emotion, but as you shift away from that end of the spectrum, that is very much perception of division being human, towards lack of that perception, it's just kind of like you're moving through a new experience, and there's things to learn through that, and as you come closer to center, you see them as, I don't know, more of experiences than something to be dealt with at all, even.
I'm glad you used the word movement there, because that's what we're talking about in terms of emotions, right? Motion. We're talking about motion. We're talking about an experience of movement in our life. And that's what we're always talking about in terms of the ever changing present. But what gets me, I think, is that we have this tendency of separating emotion from intelligence in the same way that we separate imagination from intelligence. We're like, we have intelligence, then you have imagination, and then you have emotion. It's like, right. But emotion is just another form of intelligence. Like, it's a different type of information. And you learn from it when you stop resisting it, when you accept it and you experience it, and it informs you. And I think the best example I have of that would be a teenager going through heartbreak, because that emotion sucks. But if they don't go through that emotion, take responsibility, as it were, as they're going through that emotion, not because of what happened, but for the fact that it is their emotion. They're going through it. They're either going to run from it and cause more distortion and more consequence, or they're going to sit through it and see if they can try and learn something from this. And usually, what happens if we sit through something like heartbreak is we start to recognize that we could have mitigated some of that heartbreak by just not getting so attached, or by being a little kinder to ourselves in understanding why we're attached. And so there's a lesson in our emotions. And that lesson is very much driven home by the intensity of the emotion. This is very much the case. It's kind of like when you invest a bunch of money in something and it goes belly up, you really do learn not to invest that much money in something without doing your research or without necessarily looking into it a little deeper. Right. And so sometimes massive emotions are kind of an indicator that there's something that we can look a little deeper at. But what's funny is that when you do that, they call that emotional intelligence, because it was always intelligence to begin with, right? In the same way that your imagination is a form of intelligence. It's another tool within the tool belt of what intelligence is, but we never look at it that way. And it's because intelligence itself is the flow of life. Existence and intelligence are the same thing. They're the flow. And the only thing that's changing from a child to an adult, from the perception of division to the recognition of unity, is our perception of where we sit within that, largely. And I want to get into that because this is something that I did try to make a TikTok about at some point. And I think it's really important that we talk about the spectrum of emotion. And we don't recognize that a great deal of our emotions are based on fear. And what I mean by that is, we have a fear that we're not enough. We have a fear that we don't have control. We have a fear that we'll never have any certainty. We have a fear of not being loved. We have a fear of lacking. There's a great deal of fear. And that fear exists because we perceive ourselves as divided. And so the more you start to recognize that you're not, the more your emotional spectrum changes. And it's just because, what is there to fear? Are you going to fear yourself? And so what I mean by it changes is the question I asked: what is there to fear? There is still something to fear. And there is still something to feel fantastic about. It's the core of our duality emotionally, in my opinion. And it all comes back to what is. You are alone or lonely. And it's really just the flip of your perception that decides one or the other. And all of our emotions stem from that reality of being everything forever now.
And so I'm curious about that spectrum and that flip alone to lonely. But before I get there, like I'm almost seeing emotions as like as indicators in a way. And we get caught up in seeing emotions as like this thing, and it's like the emotion is what we have to deal with. Very, very similarly to addictions. And we look at that as like, oh, the addiction is what I have to deal with. Oh, the emotion is what I have to deal with. And we're just focused on the emotion, on the addiction. I have to stop drinking. I have to, stop doing this, stop doing that, deal with my emotions. When really they're all just indicators a mentality, to a mentality that you're clinging to. And so the degree to which you experience the emotion, get lost in the emotion, like I was talking on our Patreon call about how when I was younger, I would get angry and almost get lost in the anger. And that was just an indicator of how much division I was perceiving, because it was very much around the time of when I was building the idea of myself, like early teenage years. I just remember having some really big blow ups with my sister, especially. And that was when my perceived division was building. It wasn't so much when I was younger. There was still that, but it was like, it was just something kind of being expressed in a way, because when you're younger, it's not so much that you're in the driver's seat, almost like you are and you aren't, but as you feel more in the driver's seat and you perceive a lot of division, those emotions are going to be so strong that it feels like you get lost in it, because you're perceiving that much division. And I think that's how I'm seeing them, is as an indicator pointing to something to look at. Like, oh, you're experiencing that very strong emotion right now. You're getting super nervous. You're getting super angry. You're getting super sad. You're getting super happy, even. And like in that superficial sort of happiness, not superficial, but just like rooted in that sort of divisive mentality, like something really amazing happened to you and you're not even like looking around at all. You're just focused very much on yourself. And so I think the extremes of those emotions are indicative of how lost in division we are.
Absolutely. And this is why earlier today, when we were having the conversation in Patreon and I got very quiet, was because somebody had made the point that the emotions that they're going to feel if they break up with their partner frighten them. And so we run from the emotions that we don't want to feel. Whereas I would say that what you're running from, the emotions are pointing out, which is the shallow foundation that your relationship is built on. See, because you're afraid to let them go, which means that's why you're in the relationship to some degree. So it's not the emotions that you're afraid of so much as what they're pointing to in terms of what you've done with your life. And that's very much it. Whereas if you were to change your perspective and recognize, oh, that's again pointing at attachment, that's again pointing at control, which might actually be the foundation of why I'm not happy in this relationship, why I want to leave. There's a lot of lessons there, but they're always bringing you towards responsibility. They're always bringing you towards the present. And that's the direction that they take. And so if you follow your emotions and you actually feel them and learn from them, take responsibility and accountability for them, not just pointing the finger at everyone else, because that's the other direction. Eventually, they bring you back to this conversation, the deep end of this conversation. This is the inevitability of that process taken far enough, because your emotions are always bringing you back to some recognition of how you work, if you're willing to see it and take accountability for it. And as you do, the emotional spectrum changes. The fear starts to change. Your attachment to the fear starts to change. So that way you can look right at it and not be afraid, but recognize with empathy why it's there and where it comes from. And that is the transition from humanity to divinity. is the recognition that the emotional spectrum is something that is universally accessible to all of us, that we are all the same emotional spectrum. We are all the same divine intelligence. Accepting it changes our ability to look at it, which changes our ability to work with one another, because we're looking at ourselves in another person. Another conversation that we were having today was about relationships and about how immediately you almost feel better upon talking to a neighbor and getting their name because they're not so uncertain. And it's so interesting because you feel better about being blinded. All that's happened is that you've had the ability now to give them a story and a narrative and give your brain something to say, I know what that is now. So that way you don't always have to be aware from moment to moment to moment to moment. But it's in that awareness that you are actually paying attention to that person, that you are actually being honest and authentic with yourself. Because remember, if you're there with them without making assumptions and you feel afraid, that's pointing in a direction. But you're avoiding that by giving them a story. You're avoiding the lesson by giving them a mask. And the relationship would change otherwise if you weren't. And so that, again, is the far end of this, to the point where you're no longer fighting your emotions. You're willing to feel them. You see which direction they're pointing you in, which is always back to the here and now. And as a result of following that path, you find yourself living like an exposed nerve with empathy and awareness. And that's the only thing that dampens that, is the lack of awareness. As long as you keep awareness with you from moment to moment, you will continue to gain that sensitivity. That's all it is just falling into distractions. It's just falling into masks and simple concepts. But as soon as we don't, we are in the full emotional spectrum, which makes it easier for us to see ourselves in others, regardless of where they are in that spectrum. And that's why I'm excited about what dualistic unity is doing, by the timing, again, because as we're all opening ourselves up to what reality is here and now, without our railings, without our tight little box to keep it contained to what we think it should be, what are we finding? We're finding that our timing is improving, that in fact, we are all falling into lockstep without even meaning to. And it's because, again, our emotions are leading us in the direction of freedom, which is unity.
So that shift in the spectrum that you mentioned, I just went through like a full circle loop in my head, because I was going to ask what your idea of one spectrum versus the other is, but I think you kind of pointed to it in that last little bit that you had. Because at first I was like, okay, there's, the vast spectrum of emotions, and it seems like people, especially in spirituality, have the idea that because we have this idea of enlightenment as just being like, Zen, peaceful state, kind of monotone voice, no emotion whatsoever, that the spectrum shift is like a narrowing of it. So you don't experience the extremes of it so much anymore, because, you're aware and you're too enlightened to experience the full spectrum. And so initially I was like, is that the shift, like a narrowing of it? But then I was like, no, that's not it. And I think what I sort of came to was that it's a shift in how you see the spectrum. And at first you're going through it, and like most people's perspective of it is the emotions are something to be dealt with in a way, and not looked past, but looked at. And there's like a settling there and a sort of certainty you gain from that, and by dealing with it, I even mean accepting it, like doing something with it, and that's sort of being it, as opposed to seeing it as that indicator, as being able to look at the emotion and be curious about it because it's pointing somewhere. It's pointing in a direction. It's indicating something from you. It's like an innate sort of, not equalizer, because it's not equalizing, but just like innate sort of compass in a way, where you feel it and it kind of like points your head in a direction, as opposed to thinking that this is your emotion that you have to deal with, that like you that you need to do something with, as opposed to like allowing it to be sort of an arrow like on a compass, and it's like whipping around, and then it kind of settles on a spot, and it's like, whoa, that's quite the feeling there. And it doesn't mean anything about you, but it's like it's almost trying to help you in a way, like guide you in a certain direction, kind of like intuition, kind of like being in flow state and just allowing things to happen. It's like when you let go of you, the thing happening doesn't mean anything about you. And so you feel like, they're not even your words coming out of your mouth. You're just kind of like relaxing and being like, all right, let's see where this goes. And so I think emotions I'm starting to see is very similar to that. They're guiding you through letting go of your attachment to it meaning something about you, but it's helping you in a sense kind of bring you back to where you're at, as long as you don't focus solely on the emotion itself, and you kind of keep that broader floodlight awareness to seeing, okay, that's something happening right now, and being more aware of your environment and situation that you're in, that it may be pointing something out within that.
And nowhere do we see it more than in a social situation. You can see in a room of people that the people who are thinking about themselves are less likely to start conversations or get into a conversation that lightens the mood of the room. But one person who's not taking themselves seriously can float around that room as if they're a foot off the ground and lift everybody's mood just by virtue of not holding on. Their emotional spectrum is different. It causes a different impact because they're more connected to people because they're not carrying so much of themselves, right? And that's the difference in that spectrum, is that that first half of the spectrum is all about you, the character. The next half of the spectrum is all about you, everything. So it's not just your emotions in that you can't own them. It's about you in whatever form you're taking from moment to moment. We just call them emotions and we discount everything they are. It's like you can even say, well, I'm not angry, I'm anger. And that's still inaccurate because it's not just anger. It's what you do with it, where it's coming from, what it's teaching you, what you're embodying by going through that, and what happens next. You can't just take one frame of the movie and then define the movie by it. It's within the context, right? And so our emotions are very much part of that context. It's just that, again, and the reason I bring this up today is because somebody said this earlier, that we should trust our emotions, and they're so right to a point, which is what you pointed out. That can go too far, to the point where you're just giving up responsibility. Like, my emotions are just they're the thing I'm supposed to feel right now. Yeah, but what are you doing with it? Because that's the point about everything. Every moment is what's meant to be. The next moment that's meant to be is largely dependent on the direction that you choose, which is where responsibility and participation comes in. So as much as you should trust the emotion that you're having, without clarity, you don't know what that means. It would be like trusting a compass without understanding that it's pointing at something real. You wouldn't get what it's pointing at, right? Your emotions are pointing at something. They're pointing at a path of maturity, of sensitivity, of unity. It's just that we segment them and we run from them. We have assumptions of them, and all of that is created by the filter of me. The emotional spectrum is entirely distorted by my attachment to my character, because then the emotions are about that character instead of about what is.
And that's sort of where the paradox comes in, because like you are the emotion, but you're also not simultaneously, like with everything. And I'm seeing the focused on the emotion and sort of that blind trust in it, as similarly to looking at a compass and just like with your head down, looking at the arrow and just following it through the forest without also looking up from time to time, and keeping that like awareness, like being aware of where it's pointing to, but also being aware of where you're going in it. And so having that simultaneous awareness of what you're experiencing, but also the situation that is the experience. Like when you're experiencing an emotion, it's not the only thing that you're experiencing. It's an aspect of experience itself, of reality itself. And so there's so much more to you than just what you're going through. And I think it's almost like as you see yourself as inherently divided, you're super caught up in the perception of division. Like that emotion is like 100% of you. As that idea of you drops, it diminishes to like, maybe 50%, then 25, then 1%, then like 0.01%. And it's not to say that it's not still there. It's still very much an aspect of your reality, but the shift in your awareness from being so siloed into this experience, this individual, this idea of you that you cling to, as you're super caught up in that, it's going to be very difficult to be aware of both the emotion that you're experiencing and the environment and everything that entails being reality. It's not to say that the emotion isn't pointing you at something, but as you get caught up in dealing with the emotion, accepting the emotion, whatever, passing off the emotion, because through accepting the emotion, it's like you're allowing it to pass through you, but you're still focused on that. So you're not aware of what it's pointing at anymore. Allowing it to slip by without understanding what it's pointing to is almost like a missed opportunity in a way, because it's pointing at something. And if you're so focused on that being the thing, there's lots more that you're probably missing out on because you're so honed in on that, because you're so caught up in the idea of yourself.
This is something I consistently run into with people in one-on-one coaching situations is the cognitive dissonance. The fact that there are changes we don't want to make. That's all it is. And so we will focus on feeling better because the alternative would be having to change. It's so much easier for me to soothe myself after, say, going out on a date that goes badly than to do some self-reflection as to how needy I might have been on that date, or how I may not have been listening to the person on that date, or how any number of different factors may have played into how that date went so badly. And it's just because I don't want to look at it. That's uncomfortable. I might actually have to take responsibility and change something in myself, or worse, I'm in danger of judging myself. And you see how that danger right there immediately makes self-honesty so much harder. It's so very difficult to be honest with yourself when you are so easily threatened. So a part of this is getting rid of the idea that change somehow diminishes you, that learning from what you've done somehow means previously you were less valuable. Because it's not the case. You couldn't have got to where you are now without the step that came before it. Remembering that can help, because at least then, if you were to go through the situation I was just talking about, and you are sitting there at the end of the night, having struck out horribly, possibly even to the point where this person doesn't want to talk to you ever again, you're not going to be so afraid to go, maybe I shouldn't have ordered for her. Something like that. You're not going to be so afraid to go, perhaps yelling at the waiter across the room, yo, dude, was a bad idea. Didn't land quite the way I was hoping it would. You're not going to be so afraid of that, because the fact is it doesn't tear you down. But what it does do is change what you're going to do in the future, making next date so much more likely of being better.
Yeah. So it's like being able to look at that situation, being able to look at yourself and your actions like with a degree not of judgment necessarily, but just awareness of it, and like almost like judgment, but without the idea that your value can fluctuate. Like just because you're like, oh yeah, I could have not done that doesn't mean, oh fuck, I shouldn't have done that. Now I'm a fucking terrible person and now I'm valueless. Now I have nothing going for me and now I'm, gonna be alone forever and blah 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 blah. All of these assumptions.
I think I've talked about before the hammer and thumb lesson. When you go to hit the nail and you end up hitting your thumb, you immediately have a chance to learn from that. Or you can get frustrated and hit your thumb again.
Exactly. And that frustration and that layered on concern about what the situation means about you gets in the way of your ability to see what's actually happening, like what actually happened. If you don't have the concern, and whether it means something positive or negative, what the other person did that caused you to do it. And, when you drop the story, when you drop the narrative, you can actually learn from things. But I think a lot of us avoid that opportunity to learn out of a fear in a sense, like we're not able to handle our own self-judgment because it may mean something about us because we're still caught up in the narrative. So we can't even look at things for what they are with sort of a neutral point of view and just be like, yeah, probably didn't have to do that. That could have been why. Next time I'm going to try something else. I'm not going to try that one and I'll give something else a shot. But if you're so concerned with thinking, oh, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't have done that, but like I don't know. And it doesn't mean I didn't do anything wrong. It was on them. Couldn't have been me because you're afraid of judging yourself. You're not able to see it for what it was or the potential of what it was that you could have more sensitivity to with that clarity without the narrative or without the idea or the concern that you can get too caught up in it and then it's going to diminish your value.
And it's so interesting how that same situation could go so many different ways based on where you are in your journey of maturity. And what I mean is that the example I gave of, maybe I shouldn't have yelled at that dude from across the room, at some point in your journey, maybe that's exactly what you were supposed to do. Maybe it was facing that fear that was actually you finding your more authentic self. So again, following your emotions, it's going to change according to each and every situation. This is the problem with hypotheticals, is that unfortunately they're far too simplistic. But your emotional spectrum is always kind of informing you towards authenticity, mostly based on what you're terrified to do. Keep that in mind. It's like, I'm so scared to speak up. Speak up. Once you've gotten past that point where you're no longer afraid, there's the other end of the emotional spectrum. Oh, they're still afraid, which means that now it's not necessarily about me. See the transition? It stops being about you at some point and it starts being about your sensitivity to everybody else. So now not yelling at the person across the room has nothing to do necessarily with whether or not you've done something wrong or right, and everything to do with how it affected the people around you based on empathy. Based on empathy. Because again, going back to the example of the date, are you upset because the date went badly? Or are you upset because it was a missed opportunity to connect with someone just because you were out of alignment with them? And again, your emotions direct the flow. It's always different at different points of your journey. It's so important to recognize that. Like none of this is a silver bullet. None of this is meant to be just do this and this will happen. You're never going to get that. And anybody who offers you that, walk away. This is the full deal. Existence is the full spectrum. There's so much to it. And we've only been exploring very much that first half of it, from childhood to adulthood. But from humanity to divinity, we're just starting to get into that, honestly. And as long as we're practicing it individually, it's in each and every moment of our existence that we get to see it playing out. So long as we are just willing to have faith and move forward in uncertainty. And that eternal moment in uncertainty is the emotional spectrum, because you can enjoy it and feel free, or you can resist it and feel alone.
Well said. And that shift that you were talking about, the shift from it always being about you to recognizing the impact on others, I've actually kind of been curious about that because and the shift in the depth that goes beyond just like not giving a fuck about what other people think of you. It's like there's almost this journey from giving a lot of fucks about what other people think of you to not giving a fuck or realizing that they weren't really thinking about you, or not giving a fuck and then realizing that they weren't really thinking about you. And then beyond that, there's like another layer where it's not even about you at all. Like none of it wasn't that they were or weren't thinking about you because you're still caught up in you. And there's like that drops again because all of those situations, like caring what they think, not caring what they think, realizing they weren't thinking about you, is all centered around you still. And so as that drops, there's that shift that Ray was just talking about where it goes from you wondering what your impact was on, it was all about you, to wondering what the impact was on everyone else. And I think that's what keeps people from being total jackasses who like don't give a fuck about what other people think, There's like everyone knows those guys that are like making a scene and just like, what? I don't give a fuck. I don't give a fuck what they think. I don't even give I don't care at all what they think. It's like, okay, dude, come on now. It's not all about you, though, because that's still very much caught up in the idea of you. It's like, I don't care about them because that's how I see myself. As that drops and you see yourself in everyone, it's like you don't care about the superficial narratives, but you do care about them as you in the deeper way, in the way that you cared about you when you didn't give a fuck about anyone else and you were pushing all of that. And so that the shift goes from like the superficial ideas of people and caring or not caring about those to caring for yourself, being in service to yourself as everyone else. And so there is still that lack of care because there is still that perpetual uncertainty. You don't know what it's going to mean, but there's a sensitivity through that empathy that you begin to experience where kind of speaks for itself in a way, but there's definitely a shift in all of that spectrum away from it being narrowly focused on you, whether it's caring about what other people think, emotions, whatever, to it indicating something about reality through you in a way.
Beautifully said. It's such an interesting transition because it really is just the death of the ego. I was just thinking that it's funny that when there's no you to prove, there's nobody to prove you to, because you've let go of the idea of yourself that divided you from them. So you're no longer doing anything for anybody else whatsoever because there is nobody else to do it for. You're doing it for your sensitivity to yourself. That room full of people is all you. Once you've gone through the process of setting yourself free of expectation, you start to recognize that a lot of those expectations are the ones that you've been holding on to. It's still about you. And once that's all gone, you're still left with the reality of you. It's just not the idea of you that's important anymore because you recognize that that will change from moment to moment. It's like you said before, everybody's going to have a different idea of you. Which one are you going to be? You're not any of them, including your own. Just take that in and interact with yourself as such. It's all your reality. You are all you know in terms of your awareness. And so that room full of people is an extension of you. You're treating yourself the way that you treat yourself. That's where the sensitivity comes from. But there is a process. And I will be the first to admit that there is going to be a process where you're going to go from feeling like you can't say anything to needing to prove that you can say anything, to eventually recognize that what you say is important and you'll choose your words a bit more carefully.
And that concern with the idea of what people have about you and the concern for their judgment, at the end of the day, it's still your idea that you're clinging to. Like their idea of you is an idea that you have of them having of you, no matter what, because it's all your mind. It's all within your mind that all of this is happening. So even when they seem to have an idea of you, it's your idea of them having an idea of you. So it's still your idea. So you still can't pass the buck. Even in that, you still can't give the responsibility off to anyone but yourself. And so dropping that idea of yourself within you almost goes hand in hand with dropping that concern for judgment because it's still your ideas that you're settling upon. Always. Ideas of ideas have an ideas. So if there's no idea of you that you've settled upon, it's very difficult to settle upon all of the other ideas as being truth. But that's an aspect of dropping the idea of you that I think people don't always recognize immediately, that your idea of you may not be as solid anymore, but your idea of other people having an idea of you is still can still almost survive in a sense because you know that or you think it's likely that they settle upon ideas and so there's still that, but that's still like a branch of the idea of you because you're having it and therefore you still exist in your mind as something separate from everything else.
And you'll know you're going through that if you go through this. And we've all said this at some point. I'm having such an easier time just being by myself. I feel really free until I'm around people. And then I get anxious. And it's like, right, but that's still your projection onto those people coming back to you. It's just easier when they're not around. So that's the practice. Get around more people and continue to tell yourself, you don't know. It's just your projection of yourself and get back into that uncertainty. And what's fun, in my opinion, is that in that uncertainty, in that other spectrum of emotions that exists without you being in the way, relationships change. And what I mean is that for me, for example, because I don't need anything from anybody, I'm never looking for them to like me or approve of me or anything. Every conversation I have is an opportunity for me to make an impact on myself. And you can take that however you'd like. You can say, well, does he mean the other person or does he mean how he's interacting with his own existence? And I'll tell you both because it's both and neither, as always. But my perspective has changed. And so the emotions I feel when talking to someone who, for example, is, say, going through a bad day and they're beating themselves up, the emotion I feel is empathy. The emotion I feel is what they're going through. And as best as I can, I sit with them through it and I watch as they process. And occasionally I'll give a nudge here or there towards the understanding that they're not what they think they are, or that the assumptions they're making about their day may not exactly be accurate, or maybe it's better to just let things play out. Maybe this isn't what you think it was. And I will feel great watching them realize more of their potential, or I will feel great with them recognizing that they don't have to be anything to whatever degree they can. See, my emotional spectrum is still there. I still feel love and joy and sadness. I feel all of that, but it's for the whole instead of just this single character. It changes. And it's not like I don't feel emotions for this character. I love this story. I'm really enjoying being Ray. Absolutely. But it's not separate from the rest. It's more of, as we've said before, one voice in a chorus. Ray is one voice in a chorus that I am learning to appreciate.
And the that example that you gave of feeling someone else's emotions in a one-on-one or someone that you're with, I think that is a very good example of why there's no rush with any of this, because a lot of people will get caught up in, oh, I wish I was seeing things deeper. I'm working on letting go, but there's still a lot there. And what I think people don't understand is there is a lot of freedom with that, but there's a lot that comes with that too. Like everything is everything. Being everything means being everything. And so there is absolutely a freedom that comes with it, but there's also so much more of an experience that comes with that. And it just points to going into emotions, how it's not necessarily something to be dealt with directly. Because in a situation like that, where you're with someone else and you're feeling what they're feeling because you're so peeled back that you were able to feel what they're feeling, if you immediately were still holding on to the judgment that that emotion was a bad thing, Like, oh, I just have to accept it. Oh, I just have to deal with it as quick as possible. Oh, I just have to, mitigate the emotion. Like that person has a lot to learn from that. But if you're caught up in thinking that it's not necessarily pointing to anything, it's just something that happens in a sort of vacuum that is to be dealt with, then you're going to have a completely different perspective and a completely different approach to interacting with that person. If you're still clinging to the idea that the emotion exists separate from reality, essentially, but it is reality. It's an aspect of reality that through, letting go more and more of yourself that you can feel despite it not originating from you, but at the same time it does because you're them and now you're feeling it as like an expansion from them. So maybe the root was in them, but as you see yourself in them, you experience it no differently than they do. And so it's there's nothing about it that's good or bad. Your ability to experience it just like they are is not good or bad, but it's an experience that's possible the more you let go of your own narratives, of your own ideas, of your own and be willing to look at the emotions as indicators, as pointers, pointing you towards yourself, basically.
Absolutely. That's exactly it. And it's interesting because the process that you were just talking about of letting go of your identity, letting go of your narrative, letting go of your limitations and your thoughts and your fears and all of that stuff, not getting rid of them, letting them go, is the process of letting go of the conceptual divide between you and reality, which is why we become more sensitive to everyone else. And so, as that person that we're talking to is able to process a little bit easier because we're not distorting the mirror that we otherwise would be for them, they have the opportunity to let go of their narrative and their identity. And lo and behold, now there's two of us sitting here being reflectors for anybody else who is willing to do the work simply because we're willing to be vulnerable, because we're willing to face our fear. And that fear is simply that it's just us. And if you're willing to look at that and be there for yourself, then collectively we can heal that fear and actually enjoy our time here as one. But it really is just allowing ourselves to go through the process of maturing individually and as our individual collective. It's a cascade. The more that you let go of your need to soothe yourself, which is based on the illusion that you've attached to, the more you're able to soothe the rest of you, which you can actually start to recognize because you're not so caught up in the illusion.
It's almost like going off that mirror example, like we're all always mirrors and our own perception of ourselves fogs up that mirror. So it's funny. It's almost like in like a crime TV show, or I mean these are real things too, but this is the only place I've seen it, is like the two-way glass, but one side is a mirror. And so people are both having the capacity to see themselves in you as that mirror, and you're also seeing out of it. But the idea of you distorts it. And so we all have that same capability, and the weight with which we give our own idea of ourselves is equivalent to the amount of fog in the mirror, the amount of dirt in the mirror. And so as we perceive division, people have a tougher time being able to see themselves in us because they're just seeing a foggy reflection. It's not even that they're seeing themselves or seeing whatever, because I've used this example before, but as a clean mirror. So whether they see themselves in you or they're only seeing themselves, they're still seeing a reflection of themselves. And but as we hold on to an idea of ourself, it fogs it both ways. And so that person isn't able to see themselves in you as easily as you cling to the idea of yourself. And you're not able to see reality as clearly for what it is because it's fogging the interior of that mirror. So it's equivalent to, like the veil or whatever it may be. But I think, I don't know, I've never used it in that context before because it hinders both them and you from being able to see through that mirror.
This has been a fun conversation. We're not quite done yet, but we are definitely going to come to the end of this conversation soon because we've dropped quite a few gems in this. And in all honesty, I understand, as with all parts of this process, sometimes you just need some time to chew on something. Emotions are one of those things. It's so much easier to deal with concept than it is with emotion. That's why we try to conceptualize emotion. That's why we stick it in categories. That's anger. That's excitement right there. That's anxiety. They're not the same. Don't confuse them. That kind of thing. And it's like, it's just a spectrum. It's so much variability. It's not that easy. And especially when you take into account that, again, they're pointing in a direction regarding yourself. It's always regarding yourself. It's not God's plan. It's not the direction the universe wants you to go in. It's just the direction that you are always somewhat aware of and trying to communicate to yourself, regardless of the ridiculous chatter you're doing over top of what you are. See, no matter how much you try to live in that narrative, your emotions are going to come knocking at the door and remind you that there's more than how you look at yourself. In that there is a whole reality to feel. But the problem is that they're not always gentle about it because you're avoiding them. So if you stop avoiding them and you allow them to talk to you, to teach you, and you look at the fact that they're teaching you to not invest in the illusion that makes them grow and distort. And all of a sudden, your emotions are teaching you how to empathize, and they're teaching you how to connect instead of just being something to run from and hide from and hope to God you never have to feel again.
Because it's all an aspect of the experience, and you see it for what it is. And even thinking back to right before I woke up, it was like I was going through everything I possibly could to try and avoid the emotions, to try and, get rid of the emotions. And fucking A, I had done that a number of times before, and there was always something that worked. It was always something that allowed me to just feel a little bit better and avoid the reality of what the emotion was pointing at, which was that, if you're willing to look, you're not what you think you are. You're not this narrative that you're suffering through right now. And there was a point I got to that it hit me like a ton of bricks where I was able to see that, but it was through kind of a letting go of the idea that any of the things were going to save me, because I tried all of them and none of them worked for the first time in years. None of them worked. And I was finally able to look at it for what it is for long enough that that I saw that there was another option, that I saw that there was an opportunity there. There was something that it was pointing at that I was able to let go of. But if it hadn't been that extreme of an experience of the emotional spectrum, it wouldn't have brought it to my attention. It wouldn't have shaken me enough to see that. It's like they're always shaking us to a point to allow us to see things for what they are. It's like they're shaking the illusion that we're clinging so tightly to. And if we get to a point, we'd be willing to let go and start to fly with it without that identity weighing us down anymore. But it's all we know, so we cling. As that emotion starts shaking us, we're like, how do I deal with this? As opposed to realizing there's something that it's pointing at, something it's showing us or trying to send us to in a way, if we're just willing to look up.
Beautifully said. I just had a thought about our collective, again, always reflecting a different mentality within our journey towards maturity. And just like a teenager can sometimes resist maturing, I think that is largely what our current society is doing in a lot of its mechanisms and its strategies, the economy, the government, so on and so forth. But specifically here, in terms of pharmaceuticals, we are being hit with these intense emotions caused by the lack of alignment in the way that we live with one another. And we're not learning from them. They're delaying production for the economy, though. And so we are medicating them and trying to shut them up. And that is part of the reason that we are stagnating as a species, is because we're not being informed by a good portion of our intelligence, which is the emotions that continue to try to surface as a result of the toxic attachment to this illusion that we are perpetuating. That is so very interesting to me.
Yeah, it's fascinating because through the numbing, through the lack of ability to feel, there's no direction. It's like the uh the compass dies in a way, or like it's broken, or it's veiled or something, so we're not able to even see what it might be pointing to. So it's like we're exploring the forest without a compass because we can't see it, because we think we have this opinion of it, we have this perception of it that it's bad, and then we discount everything that it may have been pointing to.
If you think about that multi-generationally, a lot of things are starting to make sense. Like if you look at the fact that your parents were subjected to the pharmaceutical industry, so were their parents to some degree, in greater and greater increments, to the point where now pharmaceuticals are just a part of our daily life. So we depend on pharmaceuticals to a very large degree. And so we've learned to numb our emotions. And then we've had children who have come into the world with parents who have numbed emotions. And so they haven't been able to learn from their parents' emotional spectrum, let alone their own. And you wonder why the kids are having such a difficult time feeling and expressing their emotions. They're surrounded by people who have largely been taught not to, even to the point of medicating them so they don't have to. And so we're just limiting all of our chances to grow. And that explains so much about how much we are getting sucked into various forms of toxic identity to the point where it's driving us farther and farther from each other and awareness as a whole. Like we have so many mental health problems now. Why do you think that is, other than the fact that we haven't been learning from our emotions for generations? We've just been tucking that shit down, not to mention the trauma that we've caused for numerous other cultures as a result of us being shut down.
Yeah, because and experiencing emotions is almost like being an exposed nerve, and the numbing agent, whatever it may be, being a resistance to those emotions, thinking that they're just something that has to be suppressed, taking medication for it, is like it it cuts off the ability for those to connect. Like it either creates a wall or it cuts off the connectors to it. It's like our emotions are our ability to connect with our other neurons within our brain. And we've gotten so extreme with our resistance to them, our judgment of them, our unwillingness to face them and look at what they're pointing to, that we've lost our ability to connect. And so it almost goes part and parcel with our perception of division being the suppression of our emotions.
It's like we're synapses that can't connect. Like we can't even feel each other. It's like trying to shake someone's hand when your hand is numb and theirs is numb too. You might be doing it, but there's no actual contact that's happening, or at least no conscious contact that's happening. And so the whole experience has been diminished as a result of that numbing. Isn't that interesting? But the work that we do on ourselves is quite literally the work that we're doing to connect with everything else. We may not see it that way, but that's exactly what it is, taken far enough. It's just that for so often, far enough has been until I feel better. So we have so many examples of people who will work until they feel better and then just go back out into the world feeling better with their own personal philosophy or their own personal strategy or anything like that, not going beyond that, questioning identity right down to the bone, as it were, and seeing where that goes. And I think that's why I enjoy this conversation so much. I think that's why I enjoy Ray quite so much, is because that's all I do. For some reason, that's all I have a passion for. It's just stripping away more of Ray. And what I enjoy about that is that all of the pain and suffering and loneliness and isolation that Ray once went through has completely disappeared, in that I don't need anybody. And it's now that I'm able to actually better serve people when I come into contact with them, that I am now better able to be there with them because Ray is not in the way. And so I've become the kind of person that Ray always wished he could be and could have never been so long as he was Ray.
And so it's our experience of the emotions that allow us to almost move beyond them. It's like they're a door that we have to experience in order to see the connection in others. We can't get to it through suppressing them. We can't get to it through avoiding them. We can't get to it even through facing them without looking past what they're pointing to. It's like our emotions are the connectors to ourself. They are our ability. So it makes sense with all of the pharmaceuticals, with the way that antidepressants work, that they numb us, that it's gotten so much more difficult to see ourselves in other people. We have a perspective of emotions like it's this bad thing. Similar to the way that we have the perspective of ego as being objectively bad, we have this idea of emotions as being this thing, you don't want to be too extreme with it. It's the whole spiritual narrative of kind of coming back to, like a Eckhart Tolle, where you don't experience much of that emotional spectrum. You're very much in the center, never too high, never too low. And that actually cuts you off from your ability to see that connection in others. And that's why I think he doesn't get to a point where he talks about everything being him, seeing himself in everyone, literally in everyone, because there's an unwillingness to move through that emotional spectrum. And as you move through it, you experience it fully, you look at everything that it's pointing to. You're able to almost let that go. Not to say it's a level or a stage or anything, but it's a way to see the connection in everyone else. And that's why I think when people are being open and vulnerable and letting go of their concerns, there is a lot of emotions that come out. There's a lot of just things that are experienced through that letting go, because you're finally relinquishing the gate that was holding all of that back out of fear. Like you should, because you thought you shouldn't have been doing it, or you were taking pharmaceutical drugs that were suppressing that experience. Through the suppression is the inability to experience as much empathy and connection as you could without the suppression. So it's like our emotions are our ticket to seeing ourselves and everyone else, similar to the way that ego is your ticket to experience. It's an opportunity to see beyond them.
Well said. I have to wonder, just because, again, there is so much value in Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now, some of the non-dual philosophy stuff. There's a lot of insight there, but there is very much almost the skirting of emotion. Like we don't quite want to dig into it as much as we should. Somebody was communicating this today in our group, which is the reason this conversation came up. And it's just because honestly, it's a lot. Emotion is a lot. It's like a whole other force in nature. There's so much behind it, and there is no protection from it outside of numbing yourself. And so there have been so many conversations that have led to the conceptual, that have led to the spiritual, trying to cope with the emotional. And here we are saying that clarity and the emotional spectrum are one and the same. That clarity only gets enhanced with the exception of that emotional spectrum, and that the discomfort of doing that is, in fact, the furthering of our collective intelligence. And so, a lot like the 4 minute mile couldn't be beat for the longest time, and everybody just kind of accepted that. And then all of a sudden, somebody went and beat that, and then other people started to beat it. One has to wonder if perhaps the conversation here and the willingness that we are showing in regards to going into that emotional spectrum with clarity is going to spawn other conversations throughout the world as we collectively start to tackle this next phase of our intelligence that is ultimately emotion. And of course it is, because it is so uncomfortable to look at. Of course, that's the next lesson, because it's so much uncertainty. So I'm really looking forward to that. And I just wanted to mention, because this is an important part of dualistic unity right now, we are working on making it possible to encourage people in our community to host local groups discussion groups about some of the things that we do here on the podcast, or just concepts and insights that you're having yourself, host a discussion group. We want you to do that. And a big part of that is because you might feel anxious. You might doubt that you have anything of value to say. You may not know how to deal with somebody who shows up just to tell you that you're full of shit. I've been there. I just want to say that. Going through those emotions will be educational, which is exactly what we're trying to get across here, because that's the process that we need to get into. Just feeling a little uncomfortable and recognizing where it's coming from so we can look through it and see what's actually there.
Yeah, emotions are not something to be avoided, but something to be looked at. And the less that emotion means about you, the easier it's going to be to look at them.
That is the perfect way to end this episode. So thank you, dear listener, for joining us. If you can, join us on Patreon, patreon.com/dualistic unity, where we will be talking more about this plan to help encourage groups and what we plan to do after that. And I say plan, but really, we have no idea what's going on. We're very much informed by the insights of our community. And I'll be the first to say that this episode is no exception. I did not know what we were going to talk about today until during our Patreon group, when somebody said something and it spawned an insight, and then 20 other insights came after it. And I was just kind of grinning to myself, letting everybody know, like, this is going to be a fun episode. And I'm glad to say it was. So thank you to everyone that helped make this happen.
Bye, everyone.